The following podcast is intended for adult audiences. You can also watch the interview on YouTube. See the show notes for more information. I am Robert Black, and you are listening to Sexual Heroes. Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Coach Kevin Martin. I'm really excited to have him here today. I've been following him, getting to know his online world a little bit, and I think he has a lot to share with you, my listeners and viewers on YouTube. Before I do that, though, I am going to just take a minute to shamelessly promote myself. If you're new to this podcast, or you haven't heard all of the episodes, I think it's important to know my background. So I am a retired RN. Most of my experience as an RN has been in behavioral health care, and I've worked in psychiatric hospitals, I've worked in a jail, I've worked in primary care, those settings. So a lot of I draw on that a lot when I do my interviews in this podcast. As well, I also have a master's in adult learning. And so I have a lot of experience in the corporate world with developing quality training, not the PowerPoint presentations that many of you are used to. If you want to see, because my whole world is about sex right now, and if you want to see what I'm up to, just go to robertblackxx.com and you can find my new Substack where I have some nonfiction posts as well as semi-autobiographical erotica, my Just for Fans, a link to my Chatterbait shows, my Bluesky, the Palm Springs Jacks, a masturbation club that I founded and I co-administrate with Dr. Ricks and Father Mark that were in my last episode. And finally, if you find yourself in Palm Springs or you live here and you'd like a private self-care session with me, there's a link to that as well. And this will all be in the show notes. Now, that's enough about me. We're going to talk about Coach Kevin. So let me first read this. I'm paraphrasing this from your website. You are Kevin Martin, a gay sex coach, writer, and creator committed to helping gay men release shame, reclaim their sexuality, and live with unapologetic confidence. Your work exists at the intersection of healing and eroticism, where emotional truth meets raw embodied power. You built this work because you needed it. You spent years carrying the weight of shame, hiding parts of yourself to feel safe, lovable, or worthy. And when you finally started telling the truth about your desires, your trauma, your voice, and your worth, everything changed. Today, you help other gay men do the same, burn down what's been holding them back, and build a life rooted in self-love, sexual freedom, and personal power. Whether you're working one-on-one with Coach Kevin through a course or you're connecting with him on Substack, OnlyFans, or Just for Fans, everything he creates is an invitation to stop performing and start belonging to yourself. It's not just about sex, it's about truth. It's about wholeness. It's about finally becoming the human you were always meant to be. That's great. Very, very well worded. Almost brings me to tears to hear that. And so it's obvious why you're here today, Coach Kevin. Do you want to talk about your credentials as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have my master's of science in psychology. So I've had that since 2019 when I graduated. Prior to that, I have my bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies. So I created that program myself. And in that research project, which I continued in my master's, but I was researching kind of like the connection between psychology, mental health, human sexuality, and the power of language, like positive messaging, how that shifts the way that we think about ourselves and the worldview that we have. So I kind of put all those worlds together, starting in my undergrad and then expanding on that with my master's. And then I also am a certified health coach, certified behavior change specialist. I've been a certified personal trainer for 10 years now. So my work kind of blends all of these worlds together, which I think is really cool. And I'm really, really grateful for.
I see that. And that's another thing that really impresses me because you're able to kind of live your whole truth. You don't have to compartmentalize and separate things. And because a lot of people who are involved in behavioral healthcare, they don't have an OnlyFans or a Bluesky account where they're showing their sexuality, their body in its entirety. I think that's really cool. So I admire that.
Thank you.
Reading about who you are, hearing about what you do, obviously it's about sexual fulfillment. How important is it for people to be sexually fulfilled?
I love that question. And I love it because like the answer is so variant from one person to the next. I think the critical piece of it comes down to exploring what that looks like for that individual person in their own authentic and genuine way. And
Mhm.
so I think like zooming all the way out, the primary goal that I have with my work is just to help. I just want people to stop and to check in with themselves, with their sexuality, and to ask themselves what that wholeheartedly looks like for them, where we're neither neglecting our sexual selves nor are we like overperforming or living it out in a way that isn't aligned with who we are, because either side of that gets to be really unhelpful and is like the breeding ground of that shame for ourselves. So yeah, sexual fulfillment, like I would love for like every person just to ask what that looks like for them. Like for me to be sexually fulfilled, like that answer changes every day. There's a lot of patterns throughout that. Like on the whole, I'm a very emotionally connected person. And so like sexual fulfillment for me involves getting to know like my partner's story, like what they're about, the the chemistry between us and letting that take up its space. But then tomorrow, like sexual fulfillment might be like, I just want to get absolutely railed. Then the day after that,
Mhm.
like I might not be horny for the next like 3 weeks. Like, but I can still be fulfilled because that's true to me at that time. And so like I think it's so powerful for everybody to reflect their own definition of that and to step through that, like to take the action that is reflective of their authentic answer to their sexual fulfillment.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it is different for what fulfills people is different depending on the person. And for some people, there are people who are asexual, and so it's not important. But then it is important for them to be doing things that they think they ought to do when they're actually asexual would not be sexually fulfilling
Mhm.
for them. So it's very much different for everybody. But it is important. I mentioned to you Maslow's hierarchy of needs before this conversation today. I guess sexuality was intended to be in the first, the base of that, along with air, food, water, shelter, clothing.
Mhm.
From my understanding, Maslow put it there because it was more about procreation, and if we want to keep the species going, we have to procreate, but not necessarily there because of more of like this primal thing that we need to do. And most of my audience is men, so we'll focus on men here. For some men, sex is as important as air and water, would you say?
Yeah,
Or
totally.
close to it?
Yeah. 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 100%. Yeah. There are people I know who like sex is so ingrained in their DNA that yeah, it literally is a multiple time a day need that is how they connect with themselves in the world. And
Right.
so without that piece, they they don't feel even connected to their own self. So 100%.
So I talked about the asexual person on one end of the spectrum, and here we have people who, it's as important as air and water. They have needs, this kind of primal need that needs to be fulfilled, or it's it's just a very unhappy life. They cannot be happy. I also read recently, because I was researching this. So a lot of people in the debate on where sexuality falls on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they put it in with love and belonging, which I find is not quite right also because sex can be part of love and belonging, but not necessarily. And I think that is a disconnect in the healthcare world at large.
Mhm.
And why I think what you do is so important. Let me elaborate a little bit more from my perspective. So I spent all these years in nursing and all these behavioral health environments, and never on an assessment for me as an RN or on an assessment form for a behavioral health therapist or a provider did I ever see questions that probed into someone's sexuality and whether they felt sexually fulfilled. Worse, I have heard providers, physicians, behavioral health therapists joke about people's sexuality and what they have revealed in sessions. That is painful for me to know that our healthcare system does not address that. People who are not sexually fulfilled, you're not going to get help from the average primary care provider or even a behavioral health therapist. So again, I just want to say I admire you and people like you who are there for people to help fulfill their sexual needs.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I Before I started my own coaching work, I was a counselor and a therapist. And with that work, along with different roles as like a case manager and behavioral specialist, like yeah, going back to all of our intakes, all of our psychosocial assessments, like the question about sexual orientation was limited just on that. Most of the time, it was a multiple choice that you just had to bubble, whatever answer most out of the three answers that they had, most closely related to you.
Right.
But there's no question about about fulfillment, about like sexual desire, sexual interest, our own relationship to sex, like what sex means for us. And just like taking a step back from that, as somebody is filling out that paperwork and they're not being asked those things, they're not being probed it in the back of the mind, that's then sending this message that sex isn't something that's important, and or that's something that we don't talk about here in this space. And so, for that person, if they then leave that office and they go back home and they have their sexual side starting to kick in, that message is going to be back here that like this isn't allowed in the outside world, it's only okay here. And so we're starting to compartmentalize it even more. And that's just like one tiny example that extends from simple form. And so like we're bombarded kind of like with similar messages like this just in the world around us. And so having those voices and those people, those places, podcasts like this, creators, safe providers that do expand the conversation is so helpful just to raise our own awareness of what sex means
Mhm.
for us again.
You, a lot of what you do revolves around breaking down shame.
Mhm.
And I think an experience with the regular healthcare system can reinforce shame. So, can you talk a little bit about why shame is kind of central to yourself?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. The short answer is that it's been my personal experience and the biggest theme, the biggest root, the biggest challenge that I've had to navigate through. It's been like the golden thread throughout all of my experiences. The longer answer in working with our community and over the past 10 years or so, and then being a part of the community itself, like shame is that underlying thing that we don't know we're all experiencing. And if we're not addressing it, we're projecting it onto everybody else. So hookups that we have where we leave from somebody's apartment, then we go to message them again, then they blocked us. there's shame written within that. Like we're probably going to feel shame about like, well, what happened? What did I do? What did I do wrong? Like we're going to take that internally. But then that other person, the person who blocked, they're probably experiencing shame on their own self of like, what I did was wrong. What I did was bad. I need to keep hiding this, all this stuff. And so just with that example, like shame is the root of the way that we view our own self. And if we don't address it, it's just going to continue and then keep that cycle going. I'd always like, growing up, I'd always heard of the word shame before, but it didn't really like grasp a meaning until like when I was early college and I started going to counseling for the first time. And like this is right around the time that I was coming out. And like once I had that language and that understanding of like, oh, like shame is this belief that like something is so wrong with me that I'm not able to be fixed. Like once I had that understanding, like it just made everything else so clear. It's like, oh, this is the monster that I'm kind of dealing with here. And now it wasn't so much of an unknown where I wasn't no longer like was I just like roaming around the world like wondering why the hell I just hated myself. But now I knew why. Like it didn't take that self-hatred away, but at least I had a framework for it. And I could start to put some energy and attention toward working through that. As I, continued in my mental health work, even within, personal training work too, as it pertains to our community, like I just saw so many people who are also like myself, who were battling that unknown battle, like that inner wrestle without knowing why that was there. So I think, and why I want to get so loud about shame is once we see it, we can't unsee it, but then it helps us to give an understanding about how we could start to take that ownership back and how we can start to loosen its grip over us and, our sexuality, our relationships, our life in general.
So would you agree that shame is one of the biggest barriers to sexual fulfillment?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And where, in your experience, where does most of that shame stem from with your clients, the people that might write to you or clients or anyone else?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for my specific audience, a lot of the biggest patterns that I see tend to be from religion. Religion's a really big one. Conservative areas themselves, and that might include politics, but more so the general aura, the general energy about where somebody grew up. A majority of my clients, maybe 60% of the folks I work maybe like individually with or who like will come to retreats or I'll do deeper work with like are 50s, 60s plus. So there's also that generational component there too, where, because of the time periods that, these men grew up based on where they grew up, the religious beliefs that their family that they were raised with, their life and their formative years were shaped in those ways. And then now, as they are recognizing who they are, often for the first time, it's they're holding conflicting messages of who they are now versus how they were raised. So that shame is just the gap in between that. Like, well, I must be wrong because I'm this and not what I used to be. So yeah, like those are the primary sources that I see really come from anywhere. Like one of mine that I always just really that sticks out to me was like growing up and listening to like the national news. We'd be eating dinner and then they would be talking about, oh, like Massachusetts now passed gay marriage, and then like they would show a clip of a lesbian couple kissing in a courthouse, and my family would turn the TV off or like they would scoff at it. Like I hung on to that, and that told me that this isn't okay. And so like it can come from that. It can come from little remarks that somebody says, from bullying, from our peers, from media. It can be very prevalent, that
It
source.
it comes in little ways that you may not even be consciously aware of.
Yeah.
And day after day, month after month, year after year of your life, that that shame can grow and grow and grow, even though you're like you're not even aware of it.
Mhm.
I feel like whatever shame I have had in the past, I've kind of gotten over. I mean, I'm out there, like my sexuality is out there. And I take for granted sometimes that I have that freedom. I have to stop and remember that a lot of people do not, they don't live in a place where, like you said, it depends on where you are too. Like it can be uh, a cultural thing or a location thing. People don't have the freedom to be as sexually open as I am. A lot of clients share with me that they don't tell their partners about their sexual desires. They don't go to events because they have shame about their bodies. They don't. There's so many things. There are so many buts. I would do this, but. There's always something that this roadblock that prevents them from doing it, and it's usually based in some kind of shame. So how do people get over it? I mean, that's what you're all about, right?
Yeah, yeah. What I love about it is that like it's not particularly groundbreaking to work through. There's no like, well, I do kind of have like a formula, but it's not like a magic like a magic bean that I
Mhm.
found. Like no, it's so simple and it's incredibly fucking hard at the same time because it needs to be something that's so repetitive. So, the way we work through it is, we first see like what that message is, like in our own language. So, what is it that I've been telling myself? What is my shame message? Like, what is my inner belief that I've been holding on to? Oftentimes, the word enough is probably in there. A should is probably in there too. Often at the core, like if we keep breaking that message down, the root of it most of the time is I'm not enough, or I am broken, I am wrong, I am flawed. But we want to figure out what that is for us individually and the specific way that we say it. For instance, like one of my clients, like hit one of his messages is like I'm gross. That's a very specific word, but that word stems from, this memory that they had when they were a kid, when somebody looked at their body and told them that like, oh, like you look really gross. Kind of like to your point, like that was maybe a blip in time, but they subconsciously have held on to that for
Mhm.
4 years. And that's how they still view themselves now. Another one, I've heard this one quite a bit, and I've had this one too, is that like the word chunky or husky holds a lot of energy behind it. And so like that would have been a lot of people's inner messaging of like, oh, I'm chunky, therefore I'm bad, therefore I'm not enough, I'm not sexy enough. Why it's so important that we want to find it in our own language is that we then get to individualize it down to our experience, but we get to see where it comes from. And so like that's the second part of it is like whose voice is this? Like, because the thing with shame is like it's never us. When we plopped here on the planet, like we didn't come with all of these like predisposed self-hatreds. Like we have learned to do that
Mhm.
because of survival and to make sense of the world. And so like shame itself isn't inherently bad. It's just not very helpful. It's gotten us here, but it's not going to help us go to where we want to go next. So we have to see, like, okay, I believe this about myself and it comes from this source. And then once I see that, like now I can ask myself, like, is this something that is helpful? Sometimes it might be, but most of the time it won't be. And so like, is there a more helpful way that I can talk to myself? That's probably the trickiest part of it is starting to replace that inner belief, so going from a belief of I'm gross to I'm lovable, like is such a massive jump. How we do that is we start training that like piece by piece. We start showing ourselves that like we like chip away at the grossness feeling. So helping us to see that, with that experience, that's something that one person said at that time. But is that true? Is that accurate? We start breaking down that belief and that thought. But then over time, like we start replacing it with ones that we begin to believe. And so that pathway from like, still with that example of I am gross to I am lovable, that next step might be I am a human. Like I am okay. I'm allowed to be here. Like my body is what it is. There's nothing wrong with me. Like whatever message lands with us, we just want to start repeating that over and over and over and over again. It kind of becomes like a math thing, you know, because we've repeated that shame message millions of times in our life. And so repeating a new positive message one time isn't going to change all of that. So we have to like kind of counteract it or counterbalance it. But the more that we do it, the more the brain that carves that pathway of, okay, like I do believe this. This is who I am. I am somebody who is lovable. I'm allowed to have a future. I'm allowed to have the type of love, the type of sex that I'm. I know it's kind of long-winded, but I get excited about this.
The floor is yours.
But like that's really the process of it. So it's simple, but the biggest challenge comes with the continuation of that. Like it's not something that we do once and we're done. Like we will continue to do this process in some form or another throughout the rest of our existence because we continue to live in a shameful world. You know, we're still surrounded by a lot of sex negativity. You know, we get negative messages from people all the time. You know, people have different perspectives than us, which is they're right. But then we also have to do that own like cleansing work of detaching from what isn't ours, going back to what is true to us, and just kind of continuing that cycle over time.
You mentioned politics and, the messages that we get online now. There are so many negative messages about the LGBT community, being gay, being a lesbian, being transgender, being a sex worker. So I feel like people growing up in this climate, there's going to be a lot of problems down the road because, I mean, I'm just thinking about kids growing up in places right now where the laws are horrible and they're getting all these negative messages. That's why I hope some people will see this podcast or hear this podcast. I want the people who can take steps to be more sexually fulfilled to do it. Because right now, I put off this podcast for a while. I told you I was going through some shit. And a lot of it had to do with the political climate. And I realized that, sexual fulfillment for me, like that is one of the ways to get through all of this. Like that's one thing I have some control over where I can have some happiness and joy and escape all that. So I don't want people to hold themselves back. Don't be your own barrier, right, to sexual fulfillment. And I think someone like you can help people sort through that as well, like get through their own. That's what you're doing. You're helping people get through that blockage.
Yeah, 100%. And like those blockages are so fascinating because like we ourselves become blind to them. And so, you know, like, because we can rationalize the hell out of anything. Even for me, like I was thinking about this morning. I was filming like a custom video for somebody, and like I just could not get off for the life of me. And like in even like with creating like as safe of an environment as I could, or like, you know, like there wasn't any pressure there. Like sure, like, you know, the camera's going, but like nobody else was watching me. I didn't have to be in my head. Like the scene was as good as it possibly could be for like cultivating a prime environment. But I just kept like zooming like back up into my thoughts, and like I was just having like such a challenging time. And I ended up like as I was going, I just kind of stopped, and I, you know, started talking to the camera, you know, for this person. I was like, I'm sorry. Like I I was like, this is my experience right now. This is what it looks like to you know, for me to practice my sexuality. And I was talking about like, you know, it's given me the opportunity to reflect on like what's sexually fulfilling for me. And I'm like, yeah, you know, just kind of just where life is at the moment. There's a lot that's on our plate. There's a lot of shit that's going on. And so I don't particularly feel, you know, super sexual today, but that's today. But I like that moment of rawness, that moment of honesty. But we can also like sometimes the world our lives, like puts that pressure on to where it's like, yeah, sex isn't something I'm thinking about at all. Sometimes it might be the exact opposite. Like it can be an escape. Like you said, it can be that spot where we can go to, like, I can control this, like almost like a video game. Like I get to go into a whole new world that is just completely separate from all the crap, and so like we might flow from different in between different spaces like that. And then like kind of going back to that original sexual fulfillment question or concept, like to be mindful of our own experience today is what sexual fulfillment is. Again, like it's not forcing ourselves to do anything, nor is it neglecting where that energy is. It's just allowing it to be what it is.
Different for everybody.
Different for everybody. Yeah. Yeah. And even different for our own selves,
Yeah.
throughout different stages of life.
Yeah. This also, it's also complex and yet it's also simple at the same time.
Yeah.
It's just like if you could just be in the moment, be yourself, be honest with yourself, do what is truly satisfying for you and not do it for somebody else. Like if we could just do that, it's just hard sometimes.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You posted something about personal trauma in your background.
Hmm.
I have some trauma from my own past, from growing up, and also a sexual incident. I was raped. Even now, you can see it's kind of feels weird to say it, but I recently wrote an article for Substack and talked about that at 62. I've never really gone into that ever before, but that was kind of my one last shame strongholds because I had blamed myself for the incident for so many decades. And then I finally got over it. I finally realized that it was not my fault and that I was raped. I couldn't say that. For all those years, I couldn't say it. So I know that shame and trauma, there's a relationship there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Totally, totally. And thank you for sharing. And I'm really proud of you for the work that you've done for youth like that. That's a huge moment, to be able to say that truth for us, and to honor our own self in that way of saying, like, yes, this is my story, and instead of, because often like we can downplay it or we can chuck it, into the back of our mind and have it be something we don't look at, but for us to be, able to say like, yes, this happened, I was raped, I was abused, I was assaulted. I think we can often get really scared that, somebody's going to judge us about it, or that it's going to take some power, some ownership over us. But claiming that and saying that this happened does the exact opposite, where it gives us, that power back. So I'm really, really excited for you. But yeah, trauma itself is a very powerful, very interesting world. Anything can be traumatic to any person. And this is my perspective on trauma. I used to work with, when I was getting started in mental health, I worked a lot with substance use, with like family systems. I worked with like preschoolers from traumatic environments, plus just with, education and school and all that stuff. Like the way that I've crafted like my perspective on trauma is that it's the biggest component about it is the way that we process whatever experience that is. So like two people can go through the same situation and can process it in completely different ways, where for one person they might process it as trauma, for another person they might not, and there's lots of factors that play into it, our own skills, our own resilience, our personality, like lots and lots of things. But being able to name something as traumatic for us and our experience simply helps us to give a framework or like a box around validating what it is that we have been through and the way that we feel about that. Where the shame component can kick in, it can kick in a lot of ways, but one of the biggest ones that I see, regardless of if that shame is, or if that trauma was physical or emotional or sexual, but like a lot of times I see the shame kick in terms of like comparison, like comparing our experience to somebody else's. Like and this is part of my story too, where like even now I have a really tough time of saying this, that like I was in an abusive marriage, but I have such a hard time of saying that because I like the shame almost prevents me from saying that sentence, because what it's saying, it's like, okay, but you didn't have it as bad as somebody else, or you also played a role within that, like it's not, it's partly your fault too, all this stuff. And so that comparison, like me comparing my relationship, my marriage to what I know other people have been through, to you know quote unquote worse experiences, things like that, like keeps me from owning and just being honest with myself about what happened, which then keeps it quiet, but then it ends up giving that more power. So then it becomes something of like, well, I'm not allowed to talk about this because it's not important enough, or it's not as it's somebody else has had it worse. So like that shame can really really kick in with that comparative level, and like we see this a lot with sex and sexual trauma, and it gets even more complex and layered with sexual trauma specifically, because especially if these experiences are like the first sexual experiences we've had, then or like the initial ones, like the brain physiologically is experiencing hormones that is never experienced before. So it's experiencing physiologically pleasure even in times of incredible pain and times that aren't our choosing, something that's being done onto us. And so this really complex pairing of like hormonal release of pleasure with abuse and trauma gets kind of connected.
Mhm.
And then so over time, like we can experience shame about the situation itself, like shame that happened, shame like what did I do wrong? This was my fault, a lot of like self-blaming. But then we can also experience shame if we have an attraction to bits and pieces of what happened because of that pleasure component or like the hormonal release. And so I see this a lot where, individuals, a lot of gay men, who have were abused and assaulted, as kids, they also have an attraction to the persona of that abuser, and or like they think back to that experience quite a bit, and it not only it brings them pain, but like they literally get off to it. And then like they come to me, they're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like why am I attracted to this thing that happened to me? you know but it's so real, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like that's the one thing I just want people to land on, is that like it is so understandable that you feel that way because of what you've been through, and like your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. And also, how can we help you to feel better about that complexity? It's I think it's the best word to describe it. It's so complex and completely understandable at the same time. That was a lot.
No, well, the thing that I really latched onto in what you were saying that I personally can, resonated with me is when you talked about, wanting to recreate that traumatic scene. Like, why would you want to do that? And I know in my BDSM play, I have recreated rape scenes and have wondered, like, what is that all about? Like, why would I want to go there? And I have my own theories about it. It almost doesn't matter as long as I understand that it's okay and I'm not traumatizing myself more with guilt because I'm doing it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I think it all kind of stems to like what's our intention behind it, and what's our awareness level.
Yeah.
Um, if we have that understanding, and if we have like that own self-awareness of, okay, I know the experiences that I've been through, and I see the impact that they've had over time. And also I see that nuance of how I feel about it and the various emotions it brings, but also that this experience is not this. If we're able to kind of arrive at that understanding for ourselves, and then ultimately to ask ourselves, like, is this helpful? Is this helpful to me today, to my larger picture? Then heck yeah, because there can be a lot of reclamation that can happen of safely and consensually role playing out some mirrors of that experience. But if we're kind of turned off by that, in the sense of like emotionally turned off, we haven't done some of the inner work, we could kind of keep that cycle going. Yeah. So this is where like the complexity
Yeah.
comes into play. It's
So,
so layered.
couple things.
Yeah.
As it was explained to me once, you could look at a rape scene, what appears to be a rape scene. It could be identical for two sets of people, like the behaviors that you're seeing, but in the what's going on in the minds of in an actual rape scene, as opposed to like a BDSM rape scene. What is happening in the minds is totally different.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you talked in the very beginning about, it's how our responses to things,
Mhm.
people can experience the same thing but respond differently. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, but I may edit this. The other thing is, again, this is really complex, but I hope what people will get out of this is just kind of recognize that if you have trauma in your past and shame in your past, if you can just recognize that it can impact your sexuality, you can be okay with it, and you can also take steps to address it if you're not fulfilled. Um,
Mhm.
and and I realize that trauma in the past has definitely impacted my sexuality, and I'm okay with my where my sexuality is now. But for some people, they may not be. So I just hope that people realize that there are steps that you can take to work through that with people like you.
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah. Can I share another example here?
Mhm.
So for kind of like speaking for myself, like there have been times where the trauma has been helpful in my sexual experience and also where it started to become unhelpful. So one of the ways I process some like relational experiences like that I have processed as trauma for myself, like I was cheated on multiple times by multiple people and just kind of like a pattern created or got created there. And one in particular, I walked in on this is also before I knew of like open relationships and before we had like that language. And so I was still kind of a good Christian boy and like very naive to the world and to what our just the sexuality of our community. But all that aside, but like I walked in on my boyfriend at the time having sex with one of his clients. He was a masseuse, and so like I like just got home. I heard these like funny noises from the room. I went over to the room and I just like heard the moaning. And at that time, like, and then I texted him, and I didn't text him of like, "What are you doing?" I texted him like, "Can I join?" That was my response. And so, but the emotions that brought and like the way that I process that as trauma. And what I ended up finding is that like I developed this like erotic script of being cheated on, where like that ended up being like really fucking hot to me of like knowing that my partner didn't want me but wanted somebody else. Like I just got for years, like that was like so juicy because it made me feel so complicated. Like I felt so jealous and upset and pissed off, but also that's where the pleasure was. So it was the pleasure that I was seeking, but then it also came with all this emotional scrabble along the way. And so like for a while, giving myself space to play that out was helpful because it helped me to kind of normalize that. It helped me to over time tease out, why am I attracted to this? Like, why does this feel so good to be treated so badly? Stuff like that. But then, like, there came a point where, like, once I became aware of all that, then I started to see that continuing to focus on that as an experience became unhelpful because it was holding me back and kind of keeping me from other experiences. So, I would go to hook up with somebody or play with somebody that I was really, really attracted to, but like I wouldn't be in the moment with them. I would just be off thinking about this thing that happened over here and completely ignoring this incredible person that was right in front of me. And so then I started to see like, oh, like this isn't helping me anymore. And it's not how I want to treat other people. So I have to start breaking away from this. And so that's why I wanted to say like exploring that trauma can be like yes and or like both of it can be helpful. And then there can also be times where it might not be helpful to where we want to go anymore. Kind of the key thing is that it's complex. It's
Okay. Got it. Is there anything else that you want to share on this topic of shame, trauma, sexual fulfillment?
I think like big picture, I I would love for people to just get curious about it. Shame, again, it's not inherently good or bad. It's just an emotion. It's an experience. This might be like a controversial take, but like trauma itself, trauma as a concept, like is neither good nor bad. It just is. It is something that has happened. And so like what I think is one of the best things that we can do constantly throughout our life is just to ask and to check in with these things. Like, do I experience shame? Do I is there trauma that I haven't explored yet? Where like when we ask that, we're holding a neutral perspective toward it. We're not like shaming ourselves for having shame or shaming ourselves for having trauma. We're just getting curious of like, ooh, is this a part of my experience? I think when we can approach it like that, it helps us to see that we aren't shame and that we aren't trauma, but they are like detached from us. And once it's detached, we can see, okay, I'm a complete and whole being. And also I have this thing that I'm working through, but that helps us to approach it with so much more power, I guess, because we can see that we have ownership over our own story. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of do some self-promotion here? Where can people find you? Anything you want to share?
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. So people can find me kind of all over. Coach Kev Martin is my handle on all the spaces. Feel free to check out my website, which is the same, coachkevmartin.com. You can kind of that's the hub of all of the work that I do. And so whichever area lands with you, whether it's, again, coaching or courses or content, Substack, I kind of find the home for it there. So you can find what aligns with you best.
And of course, the links will be in my show notes, along with my own link, robertblack.com. Thank you so much, Coach Kevin,
Thank you.
for
Thank
being
you.
here today.
This is so good. I love the discussion, the conversation, and absolutely thank you. This is amazing.
All right. And to my listeners, to those of you listening on a podcast, this is also going to be available on YouTube. So check out my channel there. Again, the link at robertblackxxx.com. And everybody, thank you for listening and watching.